Here's where the life of an oyster starts, with careful nurturing by the farmers who know these waters, know where the oysters are, know when they're ready to be harvested. This is Mitchell. Mitchell and his brother Frank are the third generation of oyster farmers working the shores outside of New Orleans.
Oyster business is challenging because they didn't get impacted by the oil. They got impacted by the oil spill. What I mean by that is there's diversions in the Mississippi River, the levee system, which they were able to open up to let fresh water flow into the delta. The state decided to do that and open the diversions up 100%, which flooded the delta, which helped keep oil away from the coast. Oysters like a brackish saltwater mix, not all fresh water. So after about 2 weeks of getting inundated with fresh water, they die.
The general consensus is that it's a minimum of 3 years before Mother Nature can restore the oyster beds to health. 3 years before the waters get that brininess back. The natural balance of salt water and fresh water that brings the flavors to life. So what happens in the meantime? The fishermen aren't the only ones impacted. It's hit the shucking houses too. Normally, this is the next stop on an oyster's journey to the table.
Al, how has the oil spill impacted your business?
Enormously. You know, Andy, we haven't operated since June 10th of this year. It's the longest time we've ever had to deal with a closure, Hurricane Katrina being the closest to it, where we were closed down for nearly 2 months. But we've been still operating a little bit. We've been distributing oysters, but not processing anything, because our oyster farmers that we've dealt with for generations haven't operated over the last 6 months.
We found that the people of New Orleans are about as resilient as they come. They've had a lot of practice. After all, Hurricane Katrina practically shut down the city, but the people brought it back.
We wanted to be open on New Year's Eve, which is sort of a milestone for us. But we're not stupid enough to open on New Year's Eve. We open 2 days before, so we can kind of get back in the groove. And that night, New Year's Eve, I was out front of the restaurant taking a photograph with some people that come every year from Oklahoma. And we heard music in the street. Now, this neighborhood was still pitch black. There wasn't a lot of activity, not a lot of people back, but we heard music. And around the corner comes 80 people in a brass band to welcome us home. That's why we live in New Orleans.
It's really tough to get us down. I mean, you know, you hit us with a hurricane, and you hit us with this this oil thing, and a few things in between there. You know, the resilience of New Orleans is incredible. The people of New Orleans are incredible.
If they could do it after Katrina, they could do it after the oil spill. Here's the next step along the way for an oyster. It gets to a place like the New Orleans Fish House, where the restaurant operators and chefs come daily to choose their fresh selections. And while the waters right around New Orleans may not have enough oysters right now, the Gulf is a big place, and these people are resourceful.
And at no point in time during this whole process did a customer walk in that door and get told that they couldn't have oysters. So, you know, we had to be resourceful. We had to work 7 days a week. But between the whole Gulf of Mexico, from Florida on into Texas, sometimes up into Virginia, we had oysters in those restaurants every day for the customers to eat.
You begin to see how it all fits together. From the oyster bed, to the fishermen, through the processing, to the distribution, and finally to the table. In spite of the damage done by the oil spill, or maybe because of it, the restaurants of New Orleans have gotten creative. It's not that the restaurateurs are unaware of the problem. We talked with several of them who were able to explain exactly what has happened and how it has impacted the seafood.
We had very little oil come into the oyster beds and the bayous and bays where the oysters, grow. But the fresh water killed our oysters, and all of a sudden, around the country, everybody thinks we have a problem of food safety, of the quality of oysters because of the oil. Well, that's not the case. We don't have oil on top of our oyster beds. What we have is dead oysters right now. Our oysters today are, without a doubt, the most inspected, the most tested food product in the United States.
Well, oysters, of all the seafood, probably had the biggest challenge because they're in beds and they can't move. Fin fish and shrimp could move away from some of the oil. So as a result, the oysters don't taste great right now and they don't have the salty flavor. One of the things that the state did, which was a smart decision, was to open these gates in the Mississippi River to put water into the marsh, and it kept the oil out, but it impacted the oysters. And I think the oysters will be the longest of the seafood to come back.
We don't have a seafood problem, we have a perception problem. And if we can get past some folks putting the signs up saying we don't serve Gulf seafood here or something, who, if you can find them, I'm going to personally strangle, and I'm kind of a scrappy little Irish girl, so because that's just wrong and a lot of misinformation. If we can get past that kind of nonsense, then we can get to helping the coastal areas and the fishermen and the people who this really has devastated. But we are serving all of it at Commander's Palace, and we're proud to, and we're not going to stop.
We just kind of roll with it and take what Mother Nature gives us. But, there's still uncertainty about next year's crops, and we'll have to see how all that unfolds. I think the people here on the Gulf Coast are very resilient and committed and dedicated to their way of life. And that's really what's going to carry us through.
This has never happened before. And there is no way we can hope that this is the end of it and everything's going to be okay. But we get the feeling as time goes on that we may have another couple of months and a couple of weeks and a couple of years to get all this back to where it was in the beginning.
With such great history and such innovation in the kitchen like this, where do you think we stand in the future of oysters and seafood in general?
Yeah, I think at the beginning of this whole oil spill crisis, obviously it was terrible, and there was a lot of folks down closer to the coast that were absolutely devastated. But the chefs here in New Orleans really saw this as an opportunity to redefine what great Creole seafood could be. And so we stretched our imaginations a little bit more. We started doing more with crawfish, started doing more with alligator, started doing more with inland seafood, brackish water, fresh water, and some great recipes have come out of that.
We just want to highlight oysters and how plentiful and how great our oysters are from the Gulf. And it's kind of a traditional New Orleans play, and we're using red beans, but we're drying it out and making a red bean flour. So red beans and rice are very common in New Orleans, so we've taken a great local camellia red bean, dried them out, and normally you put breadcrumbs on top of oysters when you bake them. So instead of doing baked oysters with breadcrumbs, we replaced it with the red beans as the breadcrumb themselves, a little bit of Parmesan cheese, and a little bit of fresh thyme.
I don't know if it's just Louisiana ingenuity or the fact that we love our chefs to be as creative as possible. We're really viewing this as a really exciting time to be living down here.